high tide today is at 9:41. Low tide is at 3:56. And you're going to see about a 2.8 change in that 6-hour swing. So everything's kind of setting up. Models are setting up the same way as they did yesterday, just an hour later. The forecast, the best forecast that I saw, had this little westerly kind of dying, shifting left later in the day, and building kind of the same thing it did yesterday, sea breeze. So not going to have as much velocity as we did yesterday, because it's kind of filling in a little later, but it's definitely going to start tracking back towards that south-southeast direction and building as the day goes on. And then once it kind of gets that south-southeast direction, you're going to see that oscillation from the left to the right again. So big left trend early, and then oscillating left to right. I don't know what your forecast model shows.
Very similar. It'll be a little bit. It should be a little bit later, maybe an hour, even an hour later than yesterday. Sea breeze stuff. I think one thing that I was not clear about yesterday, was just to confirm, is that when the tide goes out, it goes that way, towards the bridge, not that way. So an outgoing tide here is towards the bridge between the quay, towards the city, not that way.
Doesn't it go both ways around the island?
That's what it does.
Something.
I can tell you it does, because I've been at the end
Yeah, it does
of
go
Key
both ways
Biscayne
around.
and stood there and watched it going by at 2 knots.
So yesterday we got out there, the committee boat was sitting on the anchor, and there wasn't much wind, and it was angled more south than the wind direction, because the current was already starting to go out.
Going that way.
Yeah, Bill?
That brings up a tide question. Yesterday there was that big tide line, and some people thought there was benefit to be on the Key Biscayne side. Today it looks like the tide's going out till 4:15, so doesn't that mean you just expect the whole day to be going that way all day?
Yeah, I mean, everything's going to be an hour later compared to yesterday. So, yeah, the tide's going to be going that way until about 4:15, and then it'll get slack. But
So you wouldn't actually expect to see tide lines and that stuff.
you're probably not going to see a change today until late in the afternoon.
Okay.
And there's still disparity of whether that was a tide line or not.
I'm not smart enough to figure that out. I thought there was more wind on that side of the course than that. That probably had a lot
I didn't
more
think
to
it
do
was
with
a tide line. There was, what I saw at just the end of the day, was that off the port side of the course, somewhere near the middle, you would fall out of that left-hand breeze. So the boats would just be in less breeze. And I don't even know if it was an angle change. It was more, they had less breeze, so they were pointing lower. The boats that stayed up closer or above ley line were stayed in whatever that line of breeze was. I mean, it was, and we actually tapped out of it a couple times just because we felt ourselves fall out of it, and it didn't feel current related. It felt more like the breeze wasn't crossing whatever part of the course that was. So, and unfortunately, you got to be careful about overstanding, because with the current pushing you to the left, tack near ley line, and by the time you get closer to the mark, you're kind of reaching in. You're giving up a lot of distance to the guy that gets that ley line, just underneath, and the current sweeps him right up to the mark. You're giving up a lot of distance to that guy. So
That's why the guy in first place ended up way ahead a lot of the time, because he could tack
wherever he wanted.
at the ley line or a little below it. Everybody else piled up. But if you had to overstand, because if you were to tack short of the group, you're probably going to fall out of the pressure and end up further behind.
There's a balance. If you could pick your spot to tack on ley line, you were much better off than if you had to deal with another boat. You had to balance whether you tried to stay low and risk the falling out of the breeze or overstanding on the other side. It was tricky when you were near a bunch of boats, I think.
So that brings up a good point that we can talk about as well with the tide, is what are some ways to figure out what the tide is doing? How strong is it flowing? What direction is it flowing? What are some key telltale things that we look for? One point, like Jeff said, was looking at how the committee boat's sitting on its anchor line. With the light air, it's even easier to see which way the current's flowing and how strong it is. And for all of us that were in St. Pete, we saw the same thing. The committee was actually sitting backwards compared to what the breeze was doing most of the time. So that's one way we can look. The other way is just sailing upwind. There's all kinds of land references, especially when we're sailing on starboard tack. We had Key Biscayne. It's kind of a land reference, so you can see how your bow is tracking compared to that land, to see if you're getting swept from right to left a little bit, how strong. During the other tack, you can look at how your bow is sailing compared to the breeze. So if you sail through a knock, how big is that knock? Some of it could be tide related, some of it could be velocity related. But using those little key telltale signs to tell you what the tide's doing and how strong it's going. I don't know what you guys look for.
Yeah, I mean, if you can sail by anything that's anchored to the bottom, that's really useful, obviously. Bringing it, yeah, you can use some of it. You're probably not going to carry a tide stick on your Lightning, but the best thing I like to do, I mean, you got a cracker, a piece of it, throw it in the water and watch that a little bit. That way you don't have to pick it up. It's not like throwing
Use your
sponge.
sponge.
Then you got to get your sponge back.
Because the sponge won't blow. It stays down in water.
You need a fixed reference it to.
Right, yeah, next to an anchored committee boat or a
Use a
mark
committee
or
boat or the
whatever.
pinnet.
The gate.
Committee board wouldn't get mad if we both put crackers in them.
30 boats, I'll throw sponges at the committee boat. Any questions so far? So one thing that we also wanted to touch on is getting, it seems like everyone's struggling at getting off the line again. And so one thing that we really want to focus on, especially with the outgoing tide, is make sure in the lighter, make sure that the boat's moving at all times. Try to minimize how slow you get so that it's easier to speed up, it's easier to maneuver. When you approach the line, try not to get up to the line too early. Make sure that you have enough pace to accelerate and get as close to the line as you can at full speed. Will, do you have anything to add about getting off the line?
Well, it's over the first race, so I guess we got off really well. I mean, I thought similar, even as the breeze came up, I think still giving yourself that space to accelerate forward, and as the breeze comes up, it's easier to sail close haul sooner than having to accelerate, a little more reaching. I thought that last race, it seemed like everybody was super late to the line. I think the breeze went really far left for, at 30 seconds-ish, 45 seconds, and we started sailing at 30 seconds. And I was only 4 boats from the pin, and we were close haul from 20 so seconds to go. And I almost put a hole in Super Dave's boat, but I thought we had a really good start again. And that was just a time distance thing, recognizing what the breeze had done, and you can't forget that the breeze is changing. Check the breeze in 5 minutes, and then you got to check it again in 3 minutes. You're not going to do a wind shot at 130, but you need to try to look at a flag on the committee boat, look at maybe somebody sailing along, but you got to keep up with what the breeze is doing. It's changing during that starting sequence, and I think you can lose track of what's happening, and that really affects your time distance. If the breeze went right, we're all going to be going closer to the line because it's easier to sail up to the line. Flat, it's going to be a little bit harder to sail up to that line.
If I could just add,
Yeah.
one thing about starting, to me, it's one of the easiest things to practice. You go out, pick a couple of marks and say that's a starting line, and you just go through the sequence continually again and again. So you practice the sequence of getting the boat moving, how long it takes to get moving, time on distance.
Louder, Jet.
I don't have any more. Move closer. I'm just saying that I think it's easy to practice starting by yourself. It's one of the things you can practice by yourself. By going out, finding 2 marks or even 1 mark, and just practice with time and get the time on distance, figure in the sense of where the ley line is, the sense of how long it takes to get the boat moving. And, you do it 25 times, and you get better and better at it. The other thing, I think it's important to figure out how you divide up the teamwork in the boat. In my boat, what I like to have is the front person is counting the time, especially in the last minute and a half, every 5 seconds, and then in the last 30 seconds, every second. I like to have the middle guy looking for the distance to the line. We always try and get a line sight. It's almost never useful. But you can practice looking at both ends and figuring out how far off the line you are. And it's, you know, the thing is, it's teamwork, and one guy can't do it. So it's, you know, and how you communicate with that middle guy, telling you the distance off the line, figuring out when to go, just keep coming back and doing it, and figuring out what the communication is.
I have something to add about the line sight. I agree with Ted that sometimes when you're in a big crowd, it's hard to use a line sight. But yesterday in the last start, someone Will was saying that there was a lot of boats off. We were down about third from the committee boat, and the line sag in the middle of the line was extraordinary. I mean, it was 5 boat lengths. The middle boats were off the line.
It'll be line bulge today.
And because of the current, probably a little bit pushing you downwind. But I mean, same thing. We accelerated at 25 seconds to go, and I was looking. I said, we have our sight. It was so easy to use because there was no one anywhere near the line. And so we just started going, and people were screaming at us, "You're over, you're over." We're like 3 boat lengths ahead of other boats, and we're like, we're still way below our. I think we were probably a boat length or so off the line by the time we got to the start, and people are straight behind us. And I think it was maybe because of a little bit of a left shift, but it also people were getting pushed back farther. And what Ched said, your time on distance is going to change with the current as well. I mean, not just the wind, but the current's going to push you back, so you're not going to gain on the line. And if you it was easy to see because we had our sight, and that was an easy one to use because there was so much, you could see it so easily with all the boats off of it. And it was just, we sheeted in really early, and because that was the one time that a line sight works really well is when you have a clear view of one end. And you can make a big jump on people if they don't have something like that. You know that you have 3 boat lengths to go, and they think they're close to the line or something. So it worked really well in the last race.
Any questions?
How come you were so far behind me?
Because you sheeted in first.
Any other questions? Anything else you guys want to talk about that you want to hear?
We got time.
So the race committee is going to postpone for an hour. They're going to let the sea breeze develop again. So we're kind of on standby. Once the sea breeze develops, the game plan is to get 4 races in today.
Wow.
So bring extra water, extra food, be prepared for a long day. Other than that, if you have any questions, there it is. Walk up to us, let us know.
Yeah, back to what Nick said, the water and food, that's a big deal, especially in a long day. And sometimes you forget to eat or drink, and even during a race, it's good to have water available in the cockpit. And, 3 races is a lot, but 4, I mean, by the end of the day, if you haven't been eating already, it's too late, or drinking. So you need to do it like every time you stop. Just force yourself to do it.
Christine's in charge of that, and to make sure, even if you don't want to, that you drink something or eat something. It gets hot and you're not hungry, and it's not fun, but you got to put something down, you're going to fade.
I want to say 2 things. And I've been thinking about, listen to what people have been saying for the last couple of days. First, when you're in a big fleet, like we have 50 boats here, and people are saying it's super hard to start in a big fleet. And I think if you're intimidated by big fleet starts, just remember, on the starting line, you've got 10 boats around you. So think you've got to start in that group that you're with and have a better start than all those boats. I mean, the big fleet comes to where you're going to pick your area, your 5th of the starting line or your 3rd of the starting line, but still you only have a finite number of boats around you that you have to beat off the line. So that's the first thing I was thinking about. And the second thing is, if you're confused about what the current's doing, say you come around the gate, you pick your gate, know who the other boats are that are rounding around you. So if you're rounding the right-hand gate and boat numbers 3 and 4 are rounding the opposite gate, somebody on your boat should pay attention when the boats split and when you come back together. Is somebody gaining continually on one side of you? If people are gaining on your left, it should be a warning, something might be good about the left-hand side. And I think too often when people get stuck behind in the chaos of the middle of the fleet or in the back third, they forget, they have no idea who was by them in front, behind, at the other gate, so they lose that perspective. And sometimes it's just a question of looking and saying, man, that guy rounded by us and now we're crossing by 5 boat lengths. Were we that lifted, or is there something good about our side? Or if somebody got to our hip and we let them leverage to that side and they gained on us, then we want to protect that more and more. So sometimes it's not the complexity of, you know, the theory behind it all. Sometimes it's basic observations where you just notice that something's consistently the same that you need to act on. So sometimes keep it simple.
I'd like to just elaborate on something that Dave Stark brought up last night about the bang tension downwind. He was talking about what you think is too loose, what you think is too tight, what works, but what I never heard was some kind of gauge to make it relevant, you know. And what I would try and think about is, my maxim is, I'd like to see the top batten basically parallel to the boom, just like trimming the main upwind. And it's a little hard to judge, but you know, the ideal thing is to have a coach out there look at you from the side and look at what point the top batten is 90 degrees to the center line. Because the boom doesn't go out all the way against the shrouds, it's a little beyond parallel to the boom. And I've always tried to set it sort of parallel to the boom. And maybe even looser than that is good. And I think one thing is when it gets out forward, if the boat's going that way, and if the top batten is going forward, it promotes flow going from the main across to the spinnaker and lets you scoot a little lower. The other thing about getting the top batten going forward is it propels the mast over to weather. So if it starts to get hairy and a wave gets under you, it can quickly flip you over. We had a pretty close call yesterday when we were scooting down a wave, and all of a sudden Charlie and I were both, whoa, getting in the boat and thinking this is going to look pretty silly to tip over in 8 knots. One thing to be aware of, you can't do that, and I think it's very important for the front person. It seems to be consistent in fast downwind boats that the front person is at least semi-conscious of that bang setting, semi-conscious of the wind coming from behind, and if it's a big puff coming, putting it on harder for control, and then if it gets lighter, letting it off a little bit so you can do that low scoop, get the spin. It promotes the wind coming across the main into the spinnaker and scooting downwind. If you sail a laser a lot, you kind of get used to it, because in a laser you use the leech as the loft of the sail going downwind, letting the top batten go forward and rolling the boat wildly.
The forward crew actually can see the top batten really well, because they're sitting like under they can just look straight up the sail and they can see if that top batten is forward of you know, basically perpendicular to the direction of the boat. If that's, it's really easy to see if you're sitting where they are. So they can just look up and give it a check. Because sometimes the skipper, whoever else, you know, whoever has the vang to paint on your boat, may not have thought of that yet. And after the rounding or whatever, they can just look up really fast to see if it's in the proper spot. So.
One thing too to kind of build upon what these guys are saying is, and we do in our boat, is we have marks on our boom vang up by the block by the boom, so that when we come around the weather mark, we can replicate our settings. You know, we sail downwind in practice. We know we get our top batten to where we like it, and we look and see we're at our red mark, we're at our yellow mark, we're at our green mark. So during the race, when we come around the weather mark, we can easily just go to that mark, that setting, and then we can fine tune from there once we get going. Any other questions?
Do you think we'll have chalk like yesterday if the wind isn't the same?
A little later in the afternoon. Yeah, but not as bad as yesterday.
How much chalk we're going to get?
Chad, I spent a day with you over in St. Pete in some chop, and yesterday we didn't do well with the chop. Peeling too much or not, slamming. And everybody was talking about what you talked about, is keeping the boat heeled just perfect no matter what. And then taking the hit. So yesterday there were sets of 3 or sets of 2. They were pretty good size. And I was going to ask David this yesterday, but I'll ask you. How many bad hits do you take before you bail out and put a little heel in the boat?
Hopefully none.
Well, how are you
Hopefully
getting?
you see it coming.
Okay, and you're doing what? Just pushing down a little bit, loading up the boat?
Well, you know, it depends so much on how much pressure there is in the rig. And you know, like Cruz says, sometimes you want us to hike into the wave, and sometimes you want us to get in. You know, and to me, it's just a feel of do I have enough pressure in the sail to keep the boat pressured up going through the wave? Okay, or is it is it a little down pressure? And I guess it's sort of a sense of what's on the helm. And if it's a little down pressure, you know, it's like yesterday it was seat. go from the rail onto the seat to keep the lure chine in and keep that heel. But something that I thought was pretty neat, and I actually started to think about, is Skip said yesterday, we all see the waves. It's seeing the flat spots to go high. You know, and at one point yesterday we were having a little battle with Ed Adams up the last peak, and he was sort of climbing off of us. And Charlie says, a little height would be nice here. And saw a flat place. Oh, we'll use this. Pull on the main sheet pretty hard and let it climb up. So using the flat spot to go high, something I took out of that I think is pretty neat. Often forget because you're so focused on keeping it moving through the waves, you forget about the opportunity in the flat spot.
I think to add to that, everybody's looking for a magic bullet for going through the chop, and where'd you have your traveler, your main sheet, your backstay. For me yesterday, the answers, they were everywhere. It depended on the situation, the waves, the flat spot, how much wind there was. When it was real windy, we're pretty light, so we were fully depowering, and then it would get lighter, we have to power back up. If we wanted to be in a point mode, we go with less backstay to go for a deeper main. But the one thing in common, is, especially in that chop, is you want to keep the boat really balanced so that the rudder isn't loaded, so that you can steer through the chop when you need to. And the other thing is, if you slow down and you need to accelerate with a loaded rudder, then that's never going to happen if you're dragging the rudder behind the boat while you're trying to accelerate. So very important to keep the boat balanced in that stuff. Maybe that's the one thing you can you always need to do, is have it balanced in that stuff.
And I think that, to your point, is if you're the helmsman and you've got your main sheet, but somebody else is pulling the backstay on or making some of the control adjustments, goes back to the point 2 days ago about communication. You need to talk about what your helm is, and as Chet said, do we need the boat flatter? Do you need to hike harder? Do you need weight in? And it really is dialogue. And if the boat is too quiet and the helmsman's not saying, and sometimes if the helmsman is quiet, the crew can turn around and say, how does the boat feel? And the skipper might say, it's great. Or they might say, well, I have a little too much helm. But especially if there's not conversation going on, start it a little bit and talk about how the boat feels. I think that's really, really important.
Todd, did you say you eased your main if you want to point better? Or you eased your outhaul?
Backstay.
Oh, the backstay? Ease your backstay, that's what I meant.
Makes the main deeper and the leach tighter.
Basically, hook the back of your sail.
Oh.
Sit by the wing on an airplane.
Yeah,
Notice when the flaps go down, when they get ready for landing, how the plane does this.
It's slower, but there's more left.
I think Chet said squeeze the main in, not ease it, and you said ease the backstay.
Yeah.
So just
It does the same thing.
yeah, it does the same thing, but
Ease
the
the
words.
main in, ease it in.
Anything else, guys?
I just want to remind everyone, it is posted on the board, we have a radio change to 71.
Get new conversation.
Maybe. And the Southern Circuit scores are posted as well, and if you'd like a paper copy, let me know.
All right. Thank you, guys. Oh, yeah.
A question, sort of related to this pointing, in the lighter stuff. When the forestay is bouncing around, or tending to, not bouncing, but flexing, but you want to stay powered up and still be able to point. So I was wondering what the trade-off is there in terms of trying to get some tension on the forestay to quiet it down. What you use? Do you use more wire or backstay? How that.
Well, it's very much a balance between the head stay and the mast bend. And some of the point, to some degree, the pointing comes from a certain degree of flaps down effect at times, where you need the mast a little straighter, so you put on a little jib wire, possibly. And when it gets a little lighter, almost the pointing comes from the opposite. The main being a little flat and the head stay being a little sag, so it opens up the jib to the wind. So it's just like, do you hike going through the waves or you get in going through the waves? It depends how much pressure there is. That becomes very much a feel thing.
Okay, but the fact that the forestay is moving around, does that bother you much?
I think, yeah, if it gets to a hiking breeze, I don't think it should be moving around. But I also don't think the main should be collapsing and turning inside.
Short of, what I was thinking about, short of when it's hiking, that is when it's at the lighter end, and you just still have this chop, you have more chop than wind in this.
Okay, lighter.
And so it's tending to flex around and move around. Is that so critical to the airflow? Or, as opposed to putting a little tension?
I think a little bit of motion every time the bow goes, the head stay should go.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's just
And the question is, do you do it with backstay or the head stay? So I think it would be a little dangerous to put a roll on that you pull on the backstay, because you might end up with the main too flat, and that becomes an eyeball thing. If the main starts to get too flat, you pull on some
You also got to make sure that you have the slack out of the backstay. Because sometimes people, when you pull your main sheet, like your full trim on your main sheet, you should have. That's when you just pull the slack out of the back. You don't put any tension. So if you don't have that and you ease your main into waves or something, your forestay is going to bounce a lot more. It stabilizes the mast when you ease your sail out, basically. If you don't have it on at all, your backstay's bouncing and your forestay's bouncing, the whole rig is moving around. So you want to make it so that when you ease the main out, that the mast is still kind of stable. It's not, going to swing both fore and aft. So you're not putting any tension on it. You're just keeping it from bouncing, basically.
So the blocks hitting the deck.
Oh yeah, I hate that.
As a general rule, would you see that in the later stuff you tend to work the wire more, and then as the air comes up, you set the wire, then work the backstay more? Would that be kind of a general rule of thumb, or no?
Well, I think it depends on the sails.
With your setup,
well, I'd say it would depend a little bit on what mode the mast tuning's in.
Okay.
Basically, if my mast tuning is in a lighter mode than the wind I've got going, the wires go on hard.
Okay.
As the wind goes up. If it's more in an uprange mode, more than the wind is, in other words, the mast is blocked back, it's tighter, the main's tending to be full, it might go more, a little more backstay to open the main.
Anything else, guys? All right, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, guys.